Hello, my name's David Diley. Welcome to the Scarlet View. I'm currently in the wonderful Marsa Chagres in the southern Red Sea, and this is part 2 of the review for the Paralenz Dive Camera. I'm out here in the southern Red Sea on a promotional video shoot for the Red Sea Diving Safari Company out here, so I figured this would be a really good opportunity for me to really put the Paralenz through its paces on a professional shoot. Now, what we're going to do in this second part of the review is we're going to take a look at the mounting options that Paralenz have available for the camera, and we're going to take a look at the performance and general overall image quality as well of the camera, and look at that in context for recreational and professional divers. So first thing that we're going to look at is the mounting options. Okay, so the first mounting option that we're going to take a look at is the third person viewer. Now, this was an interesting one to use. I did actually find it, and I was going to unscrew it for the review, but it's really quite stiff. Now, I don't know if that has actually occurred because it's been in the plane on the way over and it's been pressurized, and then we've done a dive with it, but we didn't tighten it overly tight, but this one seems to be sticking a little bit. We did actually manage to get it out to its full length on a dive the other day. So the first thing that we tried was to attach it to the rear for the rear view from the back of my BCD, which is, it's a clever thought. You've got the two magnets, which are really solid. You clip this on to the D-ring or hook at the back of the BC, and then in theory, with the floaties attached to the camera, I do have the floaties, but they're not actually with me at the moment. This should go behind you, float up, and you get a rear view of yourself as a diver. Now, for me, when we tried it, it was a bit of a disaster, to say the least. I don't know if we got some water in one of the floaties, but when we actually put it out, it just sank, and it would get tangled up in between my legs, and tried for sort of 3 or 4 minutes to get it going, and it just was not happening at all. So I kind of called it off and realized that it wasn't really going to work that great. Now, if the floaty was full of water, and if we can get it to float, obviously we will kind of revisit that and come back to it. I can see the idea of it being quite a fun idea, but in practice for me, it didn't really work that great, and the selfie stick does seem to be pretty tight and quite fiddly to actually get out to its full length. As a selfie stick being held out in front with the camera mounted underwater, it makes sense and it works. It does what it needs to do. Topside as well, it would actually be quite a good vlogging option. You would need to make sure that you're mic'd up though, because the Paralenz, although it does record sound, it's nowhere near loud enough for you to actually use it for anything usable. For topside usage or for underwater usage as a selfie stick, if you can get it out and get it to its full length, it does work. For me, as a rear mount, as a rear view, for me as a diver, it was a total disaster. So the only thing I could really see myself using this for is as a selfie stick style thing, which I very rarely do underwater. But as I said, the most likely usage for this for me would be something topside for vlogging style video, something kind of quick run and gun if I was mic'd up to do so. So that is the third person viewer mount. The second mount that we're going to look at is the mask mount, which I found quite an interesting proposition. Now, I was wondering about the actual placement of it, whether having this behind or in front. So I went actually for it in front with the plastic mount. Now, on the side of your head, I did wonder how comfortable it would be, and actually pressing onto the side of the head, you don't really notice it that much. For me, I know everybody's heads are different shape and size, but for me, this kind of pressed the top of my right ear down a little bit, which although wasn't massively uncomfortable, it was a little bit irritating. In a hood, I don't see any problems at all, and you can feel the vibrations through it as well, so you know when you turn the camera on, you know that it's on, and that vibrating function that they have in the camera to let you know when you've hit record, as I said in part 1, is actually really clever, and I like that a lot. What does come across on camera is every time you exhale, the camera does vibrate, but for its usage, it's actually quite interesting to get a POV. So I was using it with the full camera system underwater, and you actually do get to see almost exactly what I'm seeing while I'm actually filming. So for me, in terms of as a perspective for a viewer, that actually could be quite interesting. So this is something that I would use, particularly for behind the scenes stuff, definitely for behind the scenes stuff. So this, for me as a mount, is much better than the third person viewer. Yes, it is a little bit irritating on the ear, but if you're wearing a hood, you wouldn't have that problem anyway. The vibrations on it, although they're there, you've got to kind of accept it for what it is. It's not something you wouldn't shoot a full underwater sequence on it, for example. But then for professional usage, you wouldn't use a GoPro, you wouldn't really use an action cam anyway. So for behind the scenes, like a raw look at things, of how things are done, that vibration stuff really wouldn't bother me too much. So I actually do quite like the mass mount. It is weird walking around with the camera stuck to the side of your head, but you get used to it. And I think for recreational divers, I think it's actually kind of quite a cool thing. What you do need to make sure you do, though, is that you are not constantly moving your head around, because the footage will be unwatchable. If you're quite solid and stable in the water, then yeah, it could work. I would see myself using this again. This isn't my main mask. I have a spare, so it goes on my spare. And to be honest, I think I'll probably keep that on there, just in case I need it for future use. So yeah, the mask mount, I do actually quite like it. The final mount I got to use was the ball mount, and this is really where I see the use for this camera, for me in particular, really coming in handy. And I don't know whether Paralenz have thought this themselves as well, like whether this is going to be the main usage, because the quality of the build on the actual mount itself, the ball mount, is really, really good. The third person viewer is plasticky. I get it, it needs to be light, so it floats. It didn't float for me, but I'm sure for other people it would do, whether we did, as I say, encounter an issue with water getting into the floaties. The mask mount, kind of, it is what it is. It's plastic, it's light, so it's not too heavy. But this is really, really solid. It's screwed in to the mount on the bottom of the camera itself with Allen keys, so it's really, really secure in there. You know, you tighten it up, that is not going anywhere, which for me is really good. Now I have this mounted on the housing for the Panasonic AU EVA 1 using a ball mount adapter on the front left side of the camera, going to a very small arm to a clamp, then onto this, coming in either at slight an angle at the left hand side, and that is where this camera for me performs at its absolute best. I like to have a rear mounted camera on my housing because it provides a great cutaway. You are able then, if you're getting a sequence underwater and you do like showing the dive side of things, which I do, I like acknowledging that there is a diver there filming, it really, really comes in handy. The vibration side of it, again, when you're on the camera and you pull it, the switch down to hit record and it vibrates, you know it's going, and it actually performs really well. It's wide enough field of view, so you're getting enough of me in there. It's off to the side a little bit. Ideally I'd like something a little bit more central, but I have the monitor for the Shogun Inferno on there, so there's no room for it. That's not the fault of this or the ball mount, so I have to have it out the side, and it's actually quite an interesting viewpoint. So for me, I would imagine that this would probably take up permanent residence on that housing for a shoot. It's just really, really handy to have there, and also it does provide the option as well where, if needs be, I can actually switch it around and have it facing out front as well. If I want, say for example, if something really incredibly spectacular is happening and I've got the option to capture it twice as a backup, that would be a decent backup. So for me, the ball mount, absolutely far and away the best mounting option for Paralenz. Right, so what do I think of the Paralenz Dive Camera now that I've actually had it in the field on a professional shoot? Looking first of all at the things that maybe are not so good or areas which I think could be improved. For me, the third-person viewer with the floaties on it, maybe I was just unlucky with it. I don't know how water got into those floaties, if there was water in it, but trying that with the rear view was not successful by any stretch, to say the least. It would be interesting, it would be fun, I think, for recreational divers that just want a different kind of viewpoint of them diving. Would I ever use that on a professional shoot? No. So for me, it could be better in terms of perhaps the build quality, getting it to actually extend properly, but it is what it is. It's a fun mounting option, which I wouldn't see myself using underwater, particularly definitely not on a professional shoot, maybe for fun recreationally, but I would like the actual pole itself to feel more solid, so it's more reliable, getting it, actually extending it and contracting it. The mask viewer, I think the overall is pretty good. Like I said, it is a little irritating when it's pushing your ear down, but with a hood on, I don't see that being too much of a problem. I do really wish that the Paralenz offered other frame rates for PAL usage. So there's no 25 and there's no 50. I'm not sure why. I'm sure that can probably be updated in future firmware. And I really, really hope they do, because this shoot was in 24p anyway. So I've been shooting on this in 4K at 30 frames a second, knowing that I'm going to have to slow it down a little bit, because that is really the only option in 4K is 30. That's not too big of a problem for the rear mounted stuff, but it would be good to have 25 and 50 and 24 as an option. I understand why they don't have 60 frames a second at 4K, because of the media that they're using. It would just chew through it. But with that said, the battery life is pretty good, and you can get quite a bit of footage onto the camera itself, onto those cards. So what do I like about it? The build quality is great. It's really, really solid, very rugged. I really like the vibration tool. When you turn it on, you know it's on. It gives you that bit of peace of mind. And the image quality itself is pretty good. I mean, it's 4K, and there is a difference between 4K and good 4K. Would it compare with cameras like the EVA1, with the Red, with the Alexa? Absolutely not. But it's not intended for that. I wouldn't shoot a full underwater sequence with this for a professional client. Definitely not, because I have the option and the access to shoot a higher quality. So that's not really a fault of the camera. It's an affordable underwater camera that shoots a pretty good image. The DCC, the depth color correction as well, actually works really, really well. I was quite impressed by that. The color is pretty baked in there, and it's quite a contrasty image. So in terms of post, in terms of the grade, you're going to be limited in what you can actually do and how much you can play with it. But for the average user, they're not going to want to spend a load of time color correcting in post. So the raw image quality out of the camera at 4K is really pretty good. It handles highlights quite well. The depth color correction, it's not a really jagged color correction. It's not this really instantaneous, awkward color correction. It's quite gradual, which I like, and it does handle it well. The overall image does have a magenta-y tint to it, which is pretty easy to take out in post. But for my personal usage for this, in terms of professionally, as a rear-mounted camera, it's actually really, really good. I have the GoPro Black Edition 3, which I've been using up until now. This will replace that. So this will be the rear-mounted camera on my setup now for professional and for recreational usage. So I have been pretty impressed with the image quality. The file size is pretty small. The general overall sort of usage of it is easy to use. It's easy to set up. It's easy to use. The battery life is pretty good, even recording at 4K. The image quality, again, like I say, is pretty good. For a recreational user that doesn't have the requirements that a professional would have, would I recommend this camera for them? Yeah, I would, absolutely. There's the fun mounts for it, and in terms of if you want to go with the best mount, it would be the ball mount, but then you attach it on, hold it like that if you just want to do handheld, gives you a little bit of stability. So I would recommend this to recreational users for sure. For professional use, yeah, I probably would, depending on what you were wanting to use it for. I wouldn't recommend it for the rear viewpoint for professional use, but then I wouldn't really use something like that professionally anyway, so that kind of takes that out of the equation. But I have been pretty impressed with it. I will be using this again, as I said. This is going to kind of take up residence on the housing itself. So I would say overall, yeah, I'm pretty impressed with it. Decent image, great build quality, good battery life, it's 4K. I would say, yeah, definitely a plus point for the Paralenz underwater dive camera. Check the links below for links to Paralenz themselves. If you have any questions about the camera itself that maybe I've not covered in this review, then please let me know in the comments down below. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'm going to leave you with a little montage now of footage that we've shot from the Paralenz over our time here in Egypt. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again next time.